thank you everyone so much for being here. Yeah, today's session is only a 45-minute webinar about reasonable adjustments specifically for mental health. So first of all, quite timely, Mental Health Awareness Week is coming up in a little bit less than 2 weeks now. It's only around the corner. You might have something in place for that. If you are looking for things to do, you have anything in mind, feel free to drop us an email. We don't have many spaces left, as I'm sure you can imagine. And also, we have another webinar like this during Mental Health Awareness Week, specifically for HR professionals, HR wellbeing, because one thing that we are learning is that often HR professionals are being kind of overlooked a little bit actually in the workplace. There's something specific for HR professionals. So if there's anyone here today that works in HR, that session will be for you. If you don't, share it with your colleagues. Let's not forget about, very important people. But yes, like we said, today's session, it is very much about reasonable adjustments for mental health. We don't have long, so I will do my best to stop chewing your ears off. But what we're thinking about today really is about how mental health impacts employees in the workplace. So how this shows up, factors that might contribute, we'll touch on that a little bit. And then we're going to think specifically a little bit about reasonable adjustments that we might consider, as well as like things around having discussions about reasonable adjustments, when to consider offering reasonable adjustments. We'll share resources and signposting also. So for anyone who's not familiar with us and hasn't attended one of these sessions before, my name's Hayley and I'm one of the trainers at PMAC, and essentially we specialise in bespoke trainings for businesses on anything related to mental health wellbeing. And again, if you've not joined us before, we try to make these webinars as interactive as possible. So there are opportunities throughout to engage. We've got word clouds and polls functions so you can engage anonymously, but essentially we often think that the most useful thing we can do is give you opportunities to share, to learn from one another's experiences. You are the experts in your workplaces, your lines of work, maybe as a manager, maybe as a HR professional, whatever role you're in, there's plenty of opportunities to engage. So yeah, please do so. So to kind of kickstart and to check that things are working, also quite frankly, because there's been a smidge of technical issues this morning, we thought we'd start with a very short quiz, aka 2 questions. We know that mental health is a big topic. We know that mental health in the workplace is a big topic, but what we're going to try and establish is just how big is this? How important is this? How much time and attention do we need to be thinking about it? So question number 1, and in a moment, a box will appear on the screen. If not, check your chat function. It should be in there. Hopefully this will work. We'll see. But you will be able to vote for an answer here. So question number 1, how much does mental ill health cost employers in the UK annually? And our responses are £25 million per year, £100 million per year, £150 million per year, or £35 billion per year. Hopefully, like we said, this is going to work, and what should happen is it'll record your response anonymously. And as we move forward, when there's opportunities to kind of share verbal responses, again, anything will be anonymous. So how much do we think this is costing the UK? So not just England, but the UK, how much is it costing employers? So at the moment, and it's changing, it's sliding. It's looking like the majority of people are voting for C, £150 million. So at the moment, there's about 44% of you voting for that. That's now increased a smidge. Okay, so the response to this question was D, £35 billion. Billion. Incredible amount of money. I can't even imagine what we would do with that amount of money. But yeah, so enormous kind of cost to businesses within the UK. Now, second question, thankfully these polls seem to be working. How much or how does the annual cost, of mental ill health compare to the costs of the pandemic in the year of 2020? So if we were thinking about how much it costs, within the UK, costs our economy, per year on average currently, versus comparing it to, again, 2020, the cost of the pandemic. Do we think that the pandemic was much more costly than the annual cost of mental ill health? Do we think that mental health cost the UK more than the pandemic did? Or do we think that it costs about the same amount? So there's three options for this one. It's A, B, or C. So A, pandemic much more expensive in the year of 2020 than the cost of mental ill health in our economy. B, mental health costs more than the pandemic did. Or C, that it costs about the same. So again, we'll give people a moment to try and respond to this. Again, touch wood, it looks like it's working, which is fantastic and nothing short of a relief, quite frankly. So at the moment, again, overwhelming majority here saying that mental ill health costs the UK more annually than the pandemic did in 2020. And those of you who selected B are correct. So it's estimated that COVID impacted the economy by about £260 billion in 2020. Whereas mental ill health costs the economy, so not just employees, but the economy generally about £300 billion a year. So in short, mental health really matters. It is the leading cause of sickness absence in the UK currently. The earlier we can offer support, the more support we can offer, the more tailored to the individual, the better. Better for the individuals, better for the workplace. And just one thing to kind of hold in mind, I suppose, as we talk later about things like reasonable adjustments, having discussions, is just to think first of all about the culture and the training and how accessible, approachable line managers are, for example, what support generally is in place. Again, Mental Health Awareness Week coming up, it's a good time to reflect on what we're doing, because a report by Mind found that 30% of people who'd experienced poor mental health had taken time off because of that, and nearly a third of those gave a different reason for their absence. So we're not always going to know that people are struggling with their mental health. There are many, many, many barriers to talking openly, particularly in work. So there's only so much that you can do, but where we know, where we are asking the questions, where we've created enough psychological safety for people to tell us what's going on, how they're feeling, how this is impacting them at work, reasonable adjustments can make a massive difference. So if we think for a moment, just broadly speaking, what kind of factors do we think might impact someone's mental health or well-being? And I mean, often hear people think about other things that have a negative impact, but there are many things that also have a positive impact on our mental health and well-being. So there's no right or wrong here. And again, we've all got different experiences, different levels of understanding. So there's, again, no right or wrong, but just to kind of capture some of the variation in terms of the things that immediately come to mind to us. Yeah, just an opportunity to kind of share, reflect, and already we're getting a number of responses. So thank you everyone so much. And some interesting responses already, brilliant, thank you. So we've got things like health, stress, home life, things like medical issues, the environment, our relationships, managers and colleagues. We're going to come on to work in a moment and think specifically about work. Housing, absolutely. If we've not got access to secure housing, safe housing, we don't have control over our housing. All of these things are going to significantly impact our mental health and well-being. Understanding from others, care and responsibilities, poor sleep, absolutely, often so overlooked. The cost of living, finances, and again, how much control do we have over things like the bills going up and up and up and up and up, and you know, our wages maybe not matching that. Isolation, bereavement, stress, pets. Yeah, pets can have a very positive impact on our mental health. Isolation, so again, our relationships play a really big role. Thank you. I'm just kind of having a look through. Okay, so there's some work-related ones. We're going to come on to those in a second. Stress, the weather, yes, absolutely. Seasonal affective disorder, many people suffer from, particularly in the winter. Lack of mindfulness when people need support, burnout, finances, family, health, just life in a word, as someone's put. Okay. Neurodivergence, trauma and early life experiences, domestic violence, absolutely. Again, how safe we are in the relationship. It's not just about how many people we have in our life, whether we're in a relationship or not. How do those relationships look in my life? How safe am I? How psychologically safe am I? You know, just to remind people that domestic violence and abuse is not just relates to physical aggression, and you know, the harms that come with gaslighting, emotional abuse in relation, and again, even family. People are talking about family. Family can be a real protective factor, and it can be a real source of harm and distress. And unfortunately, again, these things that often are taken for granted day to day, like our health, like our housing, like ability to pay our bills, like feeling safe in our relationships, it's just not the reality for everyone, unfortunately. So thinking specifically now then about work, so obviously we are thinking about you as business leaders, we're going to be thinking about reasonable adjustments, what we can do. What work-related factors do you think will impact someone's mental health or have the potential to? And again, this can be a positive thing. So things like actually receiving reasonable adjustments, being listened to, having clear structures in place so that I know who I can go and talk to if I'm struggling, being believed in the absence of a formal diagnosis, like being believed that this is your reality, this is how I'm feeling, this is my challenge, being supported, having supportive managers, having clear expectations around your roles. All of these factors can also positively influence our mental health and well-being. But again, work can be can kind of fall into both sides of the coin, I suppose. So things like workload, absolutely. So like a manageable workload that maybe offers a bit of challenge, a sense of achievement, reward, but not too overwhelming. Social support, and on the flip side of that, literally underneath that response was also bullying. So again, the quality of the relationships in work, how safe we feel in work. Managers, again, if you've got a strong relationship with your manager, you see that they are balanced. They also see the best in you, as well as being able to offer you constructive feedback to help you grow. You feel like they listen, they focus on your experiences. They don't just offer lots of unsolicited advice, for example. Your relationship with your manager is enormously significant. Management style, yeah, things like confrontation, regular feedback, friends within work, yeah, and like, you know, I was at a wedding the other week that, you know, they met within work. Like our relationships within work are really quite profound and can have a huge impact on our lives. Regular one-to-ones, changes is coming up a lot. So yeah, so changes in your workplace, particularly if you've got no ability to influence them, there's no opportunity for feedback, they significantly impact your job. There's lots of unpredictability around that can absolutely impact mental health and well-being. We've got things like wellbeing passports, again, can have a very positive effect. Unapproachable managers, lone working, but then also having things like mental health first aiders, as someone just mentioned. So again, things are very rarely kind of black and white, cut and dry. So as much as we can have too much work, the lack of work, lack of development, lack of training, isolation from working from home, for the people working from home might be a protective factor. Emotionally and socially aware management, yeah, so the more kind of empathetic they are, the more compassionate they are as leaders, the more understanding they are, again, maybe because they've had the benefit of being invested in terms of their training, they've received support, that can be really supportive. Okay, so there's lots and lots of stuff here. Thank you all so much for engaging and for reflecting, and for sharing so much insight. So like we were kind of talking about, there are many factors that influence our mental health. Yes, things like big life events. And again, not even just you know, negative life events like a relationship breakdown or you know, we've had to sell the house, for example, due to financial situation. Also positive life events in theory. So things like weddings can be an enormous source of stress and massively impact mental health. Our environment, so, you know, including things like our upbringing, our housing, our socioeconomic status, our access to resources to support our ability to advocate for ourselves, how safe again those environments are, what our relationships look like. Like I said, it's not just how many people are in your life. You know, we can be in a room full of people and feel completely alone and isolated and disconnected. We can be in a room full of people that on paper should love us unconditionally, who when we're around them, nothing feels right. No matter what I do, no matter how I try and bend and mold and fit myself, this is not a psychologically safe place for me, and maybe even a physically safe place. Biology, so whether that's, you know, again, our health, as people have said, our sleep, you know, going through perimenopause and menopause, hormones, being neurodivergent, living in chronic pain, all of these things understandably can impact our mental health. Our lifestyle, the things that we do more often than not, the way that we think, the way that we interpret situations, the way that we think about the types of thoughts that we have, our ability to recognize emotions building and manage them. There are so many factors, and they all interact in such complex ways that kind of either promote and take care, support us and support our mental health and well-being. They can also take away from that and detract from these things and make life very difficult. And on the face of it, just kind of looking at this, and again, this is a very brief summary to kind of capture these things, it's just useful now and then to kind of reflect on, realistically, how much of this as a manager can you reasonably influence? And also, let's not minimize the very profound and important role that you play, and how the small things, or the things that feel small, that sometimes we minimize, and we're not sure whether this adjustment's going to be worthy enough, we're not sure whether me checking in with them is going to be enough. All of these things that you do, maybe without even thinking about it, can also significantly positively impact someone's mental health and well-being, and can provide a bit of a buffer against all the other stuff that might be going on at home. So work really can, when the conditions are right, when you're supported, you're accepted, it's a safe place to talk. You know, we talk openly about the fact that we all are at risk of struggling with our mental health and well-being, and we talk openly about things that might work. We've got signposts and information accessible everywhere. We've got mental health policies, we do check, whatever it looks like. All of these things can really positively impact mental health and well-being. So never underestimate all of the things that you do day to day, full stop. But there will be times, like I said, that people will struggle with their mental health, and that will impact the way that they are in work. It will impact their performance, their behavior. It will impact the way that they engage with you, with customers, with their colleagues, for example. So how might living with these challenges impact the way that people behave at work, show up at work, whether or not they even attend work, for example? And again, opportunity here to engage anonymously through the polls and word clouds, and so many responses. Again, thank you so much. You're all such an engaging bunch. It makes these sessions so much more worthwhile. Okay, so straight away we've got difficulty concentrating, struggling with meeting deadlines, loss of confidence, feeling demoralised, presenteeism, which we'll touch on in a minute. Impacts your ability to go to work, to actually attend work, to physically show up, log on, for example. It might impact things like your patience, as someone said, your engagement. Sickness might increase. And again, we're not always going to know that they're off because of their mental health or well-being. People might not feel safe or able to tell us. They might seem subdued, struggle with concentration, as we've said. Things like brain fog. Yeah, absolutely. Loss of temper. Their output might change, as somebody said, so their performance might dip. Behavior, just full stop, might change, definitely. And the important thing here is it's not just, you know, okay, look for someone being, I don't know, quieter than usual, for example, and that's definitely a sign. We're thinking about changes to someone's typical behavior. Somebody who's struggling with their mental health might also now seem much more outgoing than they were before. They might be working longer and working later, for example, and maybe are overcompensating. All these things that we're going to touch on in a moment. But yeah, just general things like attitude changing, snapping at colleagues, appearance changing again. And what we're not suggesting here is that, oh, you notice someone's appearance change, they must be struggling with their mental health. You have to proceed as though we are. But curiosity will go a very long way. And being open to having those conversations, even if you feel uncomfortable. It really, really can make a massive difference. You might get aggressive. Irritability is coming up quite a lot there. Okay, brilliant. Thank you so, so much. So you've shared some fantastic insights. And like I said, this is going to impact everybody very, very, very differently. But first of all, as someone just shared, presenteeism, absenteeism. So presenteeism, for anyone who's not familiar with the term, is very much when somebody keeps coming to work despite the fact that they're not well, whether physically or mentally. Essentially, they are showing up, and when they're there, they aren't able to kind of function effectively. They're not quite as productive. And maybe that's because they feel guilty for taking time off, so they're trying to push through. Maybe they are masking as best as they can how they're feeling, and so they might seem fine, but actually, again, as people said, kind of their output productivity's changed, you know, because of things like challenges with concentrating, with completing tasks. So again, our performance can change, ability to concentrate and to hold your focus, which will impact also things like your relationships. If you are working collaboratively on things and you're struggling to, you know, do your piece of the work, to manage your time effectively, for example. Also, as well, people might get so focused on something at some point, and just be working so relentlessly that it then becomes difficult kind of switching to other things. There can be changes in memory. I mean, again, being completely consumed by lots and lots of, whether it's negative thoughts, worries, just how you're feeling, all of those things require your attention, which makes it more difficult to be present, to remember what you're doing, to take in and absorb new information. Our executive functions change, which makes it harder to remember things. For example, we can see things like an increase in whether that's like reassurance seeking, because people are so worried that maybe other people notice that something's wrong, maybe because they're so hyper aware of everything they're not doing as perfectly as they would like to. Things like there can be changes to the way that people communicate full stop, or how trusting they feel of the people around you. Maybe we notice things like people seem a bit more suspicious, maybe they become withdrawn. Irritability, as people were saying there, is really common, and that might present, you know, as frustrations. They seem much more sensitive to even, you know, smaller things that, well, to other people perceive as small. They didn't seem quite so bothered about this stuff beforehand. It might show up not only with colleagues, but with customers, with you as their line manager or HR or person in a position of trust, however that looks. And again, irritability, it's often kind of a very overlooked sign of depression as well. It's not just a sign of things like anxiety, for example, but again, irritability, very, very common when people are feeling very low. Again, we might become very sensitive to feedback. We might avoid feedback. We might, again, seek that excessive reassurance. Energy levels might go through the floor. It's exhausting. It's genuinely exhausting to struggle with your mental health. Generally speaking, people might appear more cynical, talk more about mistakes. They don't seem like they've got quite so much hope for the future, etc. They might withdraw, they might isolate. But like we said, the most important thing is just recognizing changes and doing our best to approach with the most open mind we can, without too many assumptions, from a place of curiosity to see how we can support. And one of the ways that we might support can be through reasonable adjustments. So when we're talking about reasonable adjustments, we're talking about changes that we make to support people to stay in work. In the UK, employers are all legally required to offer reasonable adjustments because of the Equality Act. Mental ill health is a recognised form of disability. And what we want to be thinking about here, when we're thinking about reasonable adjustments, is making sure that they are tailored to the person and to their unique challenges. So we've got some examples in a moment of why that thinking about the challenge versus the diagnosis can be so important. It's also really important that we discuss adjustments together. So fundamentally, you know, even if you're a mental health professional on this call right now and you're an absolute expert in this sort of stuff, fundamentally that other individual is also the expert in their experiences. So, you know, collaborating so that people feel like there's some control or influence, they feel listened to, they feel valued. It also helps, again, people to feel safer. So kind of having open discussions can be really useful. Having in mind even just some things that might be useful can help, because fundamentally as well, particularly when we're really struggling, we might not know what we need. We might not know what could help, would help. It can become incredibly difficult to think flexibly, to problem solve when we're struggling with our mental health. They might not have received any information elsewhere about what types of things might be useful for them. So just talking together, having some potential solutions, suggestions in the back pocket can be useful, but then also being open to listening and believing them if they tell you that thing actually might not be very useful for me, something else might be. Be open as well about the fact that you're not an expert. Be open to, going away and doing a Google, have a look on our website. There's all sorts of information on there. And also being open to kind of reviewing adjustments, so not kind of assuming that, oh, okay, well now I've put this thing in place, then job done, everything must be better now, and I just can kind of avoid having to bring that up ever again. Like, being open to adjusting the adjustments is really, really, really important, essentially. And just don't underestimate the power of what even seems like really small adjustments. So before we talk about the specifics and, again, specific challenges and how we might think about them, how that might impact someone at work, and adjustments that we might even consider talking about, just to help you kind of, think about what we could talk about with people, just from your experiences, whether it's your experience receiving adjustments, your experience offering reasonable adjustments, making accommodations for people. Is there anything that you have found from your experience that's been particularly effective or useful if someone was struggling with their mental health? So we want to share ideas here. If anyone suggests anything that sounds useful, make a note of it. So flexibility is coming up everywhere here. So yes, so flexibility, flexible working. So whether that's, being flexible in terms of shifts, hours worked, when you work, where you work, if you are able to work from home at times, someone's given specifics like a late start, reviewing their workload, adjusting the pattern of working. So again, things like, given that sleep has such an enormous impact on people's mental health and well-being, thinking like not doing, potentially night shifts, in which case you are working all night, you're awake all night when everyone else is asleep, you are asleep all day when everyone else is awake, which can make people feel more isolated. It's harder to access services. So just as one example, like I said, just shifting things like people's shift pattern for a period of time. Phase return after absence, absolutely. Adjusting things like hours, duties, expectations when people return to work after absence. Putting in place things like wellbeing plans, supporting people to attend appointments during work hours. We've got things like smaller breaks rather than longer breaks, lots of supervision. Regular planned short catch-ups. I think that's really important actually as well, because if we know, particularly if somebody's struggling and their brain might be imagining all the worst case scenarios, thinking about everything that they're not doing as well as they think they should be or somebody else is doing, like unexpected, oh, can we just have a catch up, might actually trigger an awful lot of overwhelm, a hell of a lot of worrying. Whereas if it is regular, it's planned, like I said, it's short, so it's not an open-ended, okay, we're here for the next 3 hours if you need me, that can massively reduce anxiety, reduce overwhelm, help people to cope, because when they're going to next speak to you. Also reduces overwhelm for you. It just, lots of kind of predictability, containment. So yeah, fantastic suggestion. Messaging before calling, similarly as well, like just letting people know I'm going to contact you, maybe letting them know what you're calling about. Employee assistance programs, adjustments for neurodivergence also, buddy systems, wellbeing listening circles. So yes, strategies that we might put in place for groups, for teams, for the organisation as a whole might be enough of something that helps to support individuals who are struggling particularly. Being able to be off camera during calls, being able to work outside, having a quiet space to work, that can be really useful for some people. Giving people space, giving people training. Okay, some amazing responses here. Thank you everybody so much. So again, we're sharing ideas here together. And again, anything that sounded useful that you feel like you could use in your workplace, feel free to make a note. But importantly, the best thing we can do is focus just on that individual. Again, rather than, okay, you've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, they've been diagnosed with anorexia nervosa, for example, and then thinking, well, what adjustments do I make for that? Just really get to know the individual, like exactly what challenges are they experiencing in work? How is that impacting them in work? What did they think is or isn't effective, is or isn't helpful? Are there any factors related to work that seem to make things harder or worse? Sometimes it's easier to identify the things that make things worse versus start thinking about what's going to make it better. And if we know what we're not doing, that's really useful information. Help us to think about, is there anything that we want to start doing alongside that, or would kind of the removal of that even temporarily be enough? So like we said, rather than thinking about diagnosis specific, just understanding the unique challenges. Every mental health condition is going to affect everybody differently, and there are lots of overlaps actually in the challenges that people might experience at work. So like, again, regardless of diagnosis, many people who are struggling with their mental health will struggle with things like concentration. So that might show up as finding that it takes much longer to complete tasks because I can't hold my attention on anything. I've got too many intrusive thoughts that are constantly grabbing my attention, interrupting my flow, interrupting my focus. So it might be harder to meet deadlines, for example. People, again, like I said, might get so focused on a task that it becomes difficult to switch. They might start kind of frequently asking you to repeat things because even concentrating during a conversation becomes really difficult. During a meeting becomes really difficult, which then makes it harder to absorb what's expected of you, absorb actions, go away, action them, hold these things in place. So again, concentration will impact an awful lot of how someone presents at work. Again, like I said, the more people there are, the harder that might be. Like in a meeting, for example, if your challenges with concentrating are impacting other people, that might impact your relationships, which impacts your self-esteem, which makes you more anxious coming into work. So concentration, like I said, can present for so many different reasons, whether it's because of intrusive thoughts, because of emotional distress, it's hard to think about anything else, because of medication, for example, because we're just exhausted, sleep can be impacted. So for whatever the reason, and working out what is the challenge, where is it arising, when is it arising, we might think about things like potentially having access to a quieter space, or kind of like noise cancelling headphones, being able to listen to your own music, whatever that form that kind of takes, to help you hold your focus. Being able to work from home potentially could help people to reduce distractions from being in a busy environment. Having very clear tasks, having regular check-ins specifically to review tasks, to think about how they're prioritising things, receiving a summary after meetings and written instructions, instructions being given in more than one way, flexibility with deadlines, having, as people mentioned, kind of shorter regular breaks so that we don't have to focus on holding our concentration solidly for the next 3 hours after lunch, for example. Again, having like just a tailored wellbeing plan, etc., etc., etc. There's so many other things that we can think of, again, depending on the person. Fatigue's really, really common with mental ill health, whether, again, because just a constant racing brain is so exhausting, because the overwhelming emotions, the overwhelming sadness, anger, despair is exhausting, whether because we don't have the same energy levels, just full stop. Medication, again, all these factors, there's so many factors which might mean that somebody works more slowly, again, struggles with concentrating. They forget things, some of the things that we've already spoken about. You might also see people working longer, working later, working at the weekends, because they're trying to get everything done that they've not managed to do in the day, trying to overcompensate, asking you to repeat yourself, avoiding meetings. And again, things that we might consider might be things like even just like little baby breaks, to do things like mindfulness might help if there's the space to do that, if that feels like something that communally, collectively as an organisation we practice here and there. Having a longer lunch break so that people can maybe go home, they can nap, they can go and exercise, they can have some more time outside, for example. Doing things like walking meetings can really, really help. If we know that being sat in a quiet, intense room, really trying to focus on everything on a one-to-one basis is exhausting for people when they're already really fatigued. Walking, being outside, all of these things can naturally start to improve energy levels. Support with things like prioritizing that might be absolutely draining them if they're struggling with decision paralysis. Things like software that might help with automating tasks, reducing like the mental load, that might offer reminders if they're forgetting things because they're so exhausted. If there's any work-related factors that are keeping them up at night also, that are impacting their sleep, can we do our best to address those factors if possible? Can we support people to access support, you know, again, whether it's with their chronic fatigue, their sleep, whatever factors might be impacting that. So again, whether it's a mental health first aider, occupational health, for example. And last example, things like emotional regulation. So again, with any mental health disorder, we might notice differences in the way that people experience emotions, and it might become very challenging to manage that. So we might see that people have things like really strong reactions to things like being given additional tasks, just being presented with their workload, their to-do list at the start of the day, particularly anything unexpected. Again, maybe we notice actually this is quite useful, an increase in people seeming very agreeable and people-pleasing behaviours, which again, if we are to look at that from a different lens, you might see that as, oh, they're so helpful, they're so brilliant, they take on everything, they never stop, they're just lovely, they're brilliant, there are credits to have around. That might be coming from a place of total fear, anticipating the fear of letting people down, anticipating the fear of receiving criticism, and might be significantly impacting their mental health and well-being, as well as being the result of struggling with that. Avoiding things like feedback, as we said, we might see that irritability people mentioned, withdrawing and isolating yourself, maybe because I'm trying not to end up completely irritated and snapping with people. And so again, things we might think about are whether it's, you know, some sort of buddy system, mentoring system, having those more regular check-ins, offering a bit more routine to minimise unpredictability, breaking tasks down so that they don't feel quite so overwhelming, regularly reviewing their work, reducing big demands, again, that might be really overwhelming, like public speaking, you know, just respecting if people need a bit of space. However this looks, like I said, we can be a bit creative, but if we were just to think, again, maybe what were the examples I gave earlier? Someone's been diagnosed with anorexia nervosa or bipolar. That really doesn't give us nearly enough to determine what this individual might benefit from. Whereas this breakdown of, okay, what is it that you're experiencing? How are you feeling? How are you finding this challenging at work? Regardless of, even if their performance seems like they're doing brilliantly, if this is taking a huge toll on them, it is a problem, it is a challenge. Even if, like we said, their performance is even increased, for example, is there anything that we identify makes this worse, makes it harder? Is there anything that seems to reduce this challenge? Do they have any ideas of what might be useful? Again, bearing in mind, it might be harder to advocate for yourself, anticipating that I'm asking too much. Are they able to access appropriate support outside of work, or do they feel like I can't take the time on a Tuesday at 1 o'clock to, you know, go to this call or go to this appointment because, you know, people will think less of me, I'll get in trouble. And, you know, when can we review things? You know, if we've created things like a wellbeing plan, when are we going to review it? So to kind of pull this together and put this in action, and again, share ideas, we've got a little case study, and then we'll think specifically about their challenges and share some ideas of reasonable adjustments that could potentially be useful specifically for those challenges. So, for example, you've got an employee in a customer-facing role who is experiencing anxiety to the degree that it's impacting their ability to handle phone calls and interact with clients, particularly over the phone. They've not received like a formal diagnosis of work, but clearly they are struggling with this. They're telling you I'm struggling with anxiety. And so the challenges that we've identified here might be things like increased anxiety, specifically during calls, challenges with concentrating if the task is complex, fatigue, just generally making everything so much harder. So again, we might have given a million ideas over the last couple of slides while we've spoken about things like concentration and fatigue and overwhelming emotions, but again, just to kind of practice thinking about potential strategies, are there any adjustments that come to mind that could be potentially useful that, again, we're going to discuss and have an open chat with this person about to see what may or may not be useful. So we've got things like a temporary change in duties that, yeah, might mean that they do less of that client, kind of focused phone-based work, for example, location, flexible times, flexible working time, buddying system, breaking tasks to smaller pieces, revising duties. Working from home is coming up quite a lot here. And actually, people might be really anxious about being perceived by other people in an office who hear them on the phone, who hear how they're behaving, who they might worry other people have opinions of, for example. Other people might have given them feedback about how they were on the call. So having a quiet space to do these tasks could be something that we try and then we review. Being able to work from home could be something we try and we review. When feeling overwhelmed, having the opportunity to transfer calls to a colleague, that could be useful. Supervisions, debriefing after calls, shadowing, so that could be they shadow you for a little bit, you shadow them, for example. Regular breaks, changing hours to help with fatigue. Fantastic. Getting specific feedback that's actually actionable, taking micro breaks. Brilliant. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. So, as we said, we don't want to just wait until someone's got a formal diagnosis, they've been off sick with their mental health. If we notice someone's behaviour changes, their performance changes, if anybody tells us they're struggling, believe them, listen to them, consider reasonable adjustments to prevent escalation, if nothing else. If we know that their wider circumstances have changed in a way that could, even if not immediately, but longer term, negatively impact their mental health and well-being, we need to start having these discussions. And remember, it's useful to think about reflecting, what do we need to stop doing, if anything, that's not been working? Is there anything that we want to continue doing? Is there anything that we maybe want to start? And again, maybe we think about things like wellbeing plans, which are very much collaborative documents, not medical documents, but that might think about things like, okay, are there any triggers or stresses? Are there any early warning signs? Are there any signs that you, as their manager, for example, can maybe recognise? How can you respond during those moments in a way to support them and not make things worse? Can we have a pre-agreed crisis plan if things get really overwhelming? So, for example, some employees, they might have a code word. They can send to the manager if they're feeling really overwhelmed. They can't articulate what's going on. It's too much. We discuss reasonable adjustments. We think about the next steps. What's the first thing we're going to do, for example? But lastly, like we said earlier, social, signposting can also be quite an important part of your role. And actually, again, people here might be aware of all sorts of support that's really, really useful that other people here today can share, can utilise themselves. To essentially support individuals who are struggling, because there is so much out there. If you've not heard of it, things like the Hub of Hope are brilliant for finding all sorts of support in the area. We're always talking about social prescribers. So through your GP, you should have access to a social prescriber if you're part of a primary care network, and they essentially prescribe like social contact, social communication. They help you to identify community groups, whatever that you might benefit from being part of, because isolation's so impacting. And they're brilliant. And most people that we find haven't heard of them. So there's loads of stuff that's coming through here. Thank you so much. And as people do that, I'm conscious of time. So I just want to remind, for anyone who has to go, just thank you all so much for being here. Remember, we've got lots and lots of these resources. We've got this HR Wellbeing webinar on the 16th of May. If you are looking for something, you need something for Mental Health Awareness Week, even resources, have a look on our website, let us know if there's anything that would be useful. But in terms of support services that are available, that people are recommending, there's loads of stuff coming up here. Mind, highly recommended. And again, everywhere in the UK, pretty much, there's near enough. There's like branches of Mind. They might all offer slightly different things. Papyrus, suicide prevention, the Hub of Hope, as I mentioned, your emotional employee assistance program, Aura, So I'm going to have a look at this. So oratio.org.uk, I'll be having a look. I'm not sure what that is. Your GP is coming up a lot. 111. So if you dial 111 and you select option 2, there is dedicated mental health support available through the NHS. CBT, Calm. So yes, so like apps like Calm can be useful. IESO, again, I'll have to have a Google of that in a moment. Able Futures, Rethink Mental Illness. Yeah, another brilliant charity. Lots of groups as well, if I remember from Rethink. Things like Andy's Man Club, fantastic resource and support. Again, on Hub of Hope, you can select, you can filter all the support available by things like gender. You can filter for things like specific challenges, age as well. So there's specific stuff there for teenagers, for example. There's specific support for parents, charities. There's so many charities that offer specialist support for specific issues. So like I used to work at the National Association for People Abused in Childhood. Someone's just recommended BEAT also, which is a brilliant charity for anyone struggling with an eating disorder. Men's Shed, apps to practice skills and strategies, Yap, and Pi. AI is one that keeps being recommended recently as something that some people find really, really useful. So brilliant. Thank you again so much, everyone, for being here, for sharing, for engaging, for interacting. It's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so, so much. Please make a note, like I said, of anything that people have shared that feels useful. Remember, you don't have to have all the answers. Between the two of you, we might be able to generate some potential solutions, and that's enough. We can review things, we can change things, and we often need to. That's absolutely brilliant. So being open, being curious, can't do much better than that. But thank you all so, so much. Take care of yourselves. Have a lovely bank holiday weekend, which I keep forgetting. Enjoy this nice weather if you've got it where you are. But thank you again for being here. Hopefully see you again in the future. And yeah, take care of yourselves and bye for now. Thank you, everyone. Take care.